Hi, boys and girls. We are down in the basement, ready to read chapter 3 of the best school year ever. Lyndon's joining me today. Smile, Lyndon. I think she's glad for the weekend coming up that she doesn't have to work on schoolwork. I think you've decided. How do you feel about homeschool? Do you like it? No, I didn't think so. I don't think she likes having her mama as her teacher. But today I did get a whole lot of girls. Letters came in today. I had such a good time reading them. I hope to get more tomorrow because I've got about half of them so far. And I am working on writing notes back to you. And they have the correct address and the return address on the envelope like we practiced in class. So I've been reading The Best School Year Ever. And one of the things that's important is we always know our story elements, meaning the parts or ingredients of a story. In this case, the title is The Best School Year Ever. The author is Barbara Robinson. Barbara Robinson, who wrote The Best Christmas Pageant Ever. She passed away a few years ago. But she wrote this in 1995, which was ironically about 23 years after The Best Christmas Pageant Ever was written. It was such a hit that finally she wrote a follow-up with this one. And I think it's pretty great too. Now our setting would be largely Woodrow Wilson School, or sometimes it would be the Herdman's house. In the last chapter we had the Sunoco station, gas station be a setting, and even the laundromat. Well, this time we're going to be back at school in chapter 3. We have here some more shenanigans from the Herdmans. Chapter 3. Naturally, my mother wasn't too crazy about the Herdmans since they were always mopping the floor with Charlie, but she had too much to do, she said, to spend time complaining about them. She would leave that to Alice Wendlekin's mother, who was so good at it. Mrs. Wendlekin complained about them all the time, to everybody. It was her second favorite subject, besides how smart Alice was, how pretty, and how talented, and how it would all go to waste if Gladys Herdman and bit her to death. Every time you turned around, Mrs. Wendlekin was volunteering Alice to be the star of something. The main fairy, or the head of elf, or the clean up our streets poster girl. And when the Chamber of Commerce bought a respirator for the hospital, they put a picture of it in the paper, and sure enough, there was Alice hooked up on her respirator. Mrs. Wendlekin said she didn't have anything to do with that. The photographer just looked around and said, "I wonder if that pretty little girl would be willing to pose with the respirator." But nobody believed her. Alice didn't get any applause for this either, but she carried the picture around anyway and showed it to anyone who would hold still. She showed it to Imogene Herdman at recess, and Imogene took one look and hollered, "Get away from me! Don't touch me! Whatever you've got, I don't want it!" Which brought the school nurse in a hurry in case Alice had smallpox or something. It emptied the playground in a hurry, too. Everybody figured that if it was something Imogene Herdman was scared to catch, it would wipe out the rest of us because ordinary germs didn't even slow the Herdmans down. They never got mumps or pink eye or colds or stomach aches or anything. A snake once bit Leroy Herdman, and Leroy's leg swelled up a little bit, but that was all. The snake died. Leroy brought it to school and tied it up and down the light cord in the teacher's supply closet. About 5 minutes later, the kindergarten teacher, Miss Newman, came in and pulled the cord. She had all the day's helpers with her, 6 kindergarten kids carrying pots of red finger paint, and when Miss Newman screamed, they all dropped their pots and finger paint flew all over the place. Then somebody upset 2 big boxes of chalk, and they all tramped around in that. And when the janitor heard the racket and opened the door, he just took one look and went straight to get the principal. He said there had been some terrible accident and that the supply closet was full of bloody people, apparently all cut up and screaming in pain. By the time the principal got there, Miss Newman had pulled herself together and was herding little kids down the hall to the washroom, and then the recess bell rang. So the hall was full of kids and teachers calling to Miss Newman, "What happened? What happened?" And the principal telling everyone, move along, nothing to see here." Of course, there was plenty to see. The whole thing looked like a big disaster we had just read about in history called the Children's Massacre. In all the commotion, Leroy Herdman just walked into the supply closet, untied his snake, and put it back in his pocket and walked out. When we got back from recess, the principal and Miss Newman and the janitor and the boys' basketball coach were all crawling around on the floor of the supply closet, and Miss Newman was saying, "I tell you, there was a snake crawling up that light cord." Of course, they never did find it because nobody looked in Leroy's pocket. I couldn't understand why the snake died and Leroy didn't, but when I asked my father, he said that Leroy probably stretched his story. "Oh, the snake bit him," my father said, "and then he found a different snake that was already dead. That's what I think." My mother said she bet it wasn't a snake at all, that Leroy just tied a whole lot of poor worms together. But I decided that Leroy was telling the truth for the first time in his life, that the snake was perfectly healthy, that bit Leroy and immediately died. So maybe Mrs. Wendlekin wasn't far wrong to pour iodine all over Alice, and maybe Alice should shut up about this treatment and just be glad she wasn't dead, like the snake. 2 or 3 days later, Leroy stuck the snake in the 3rd grade pencil sharpener tail first, and the teacher went all to pieces too. It was bad enough, she said, to find a snake in the pencil sharpener, but then she almost sharpened it by mistake. The snake was pretty worn out by then, so they threw it away, but nobody in the 3rd grade would go near the pencil sharpener for the rest of the week. My mother's friend, Miss Phillips, worked for the welfare department, and one of her jobs was to check up on the Herdmans, so Mother told her about the snake bite in case Leroy should get some kind of shot for it. But Miss Phillips just said she didn't know of any shot that would benefit Leroy, and anyway, all of her sympathies were with the snake. "I went to that garage where those kids live," she said, "but I never got inside and I barely got out of the yard alive. It was full of rocks and poison ivy and torn up bicycles and pieces of cars and great big holes they'd dug. I fell in one of the holes and the cat jumped on me out of the window. Good thing I had a hat on or I'd be bald. Now I just drive past the place once a month, and if they haven't managed to blow it up or burn it down, I figure they're all right." "But a snake bite," Mother said. "Don't you think that's a bit unusual?" "I certainly do," Mrs. Phillips said. "It's the first time something bit one of them instead of the other way around." The whole thing got into the newspaper. "Reptile found at Woodrow Wilson School," the article said. "Teachers and students alarmed." That probably meant Miss Newman and all the kindergarten kids. "Parents seek action." Probably meant Mrs. Wendlekin, seeking to get the Herdmans expelled or arrested or something. "School official inspects premises." Well, that was Mr. Crabtree, the principal, who stuck his head in the 3rd grade room and said that if one more snake showed up anywhere, he would personally kill it, skin it, cook it, and feed it to whoever was responsible. I don't know whether that would have scared Leroy or not, but it didn't matter anyway because he wasn't there. Imogene said he stayed home to bury the snake, and she had his messy, scribbled-up note that said, "Leroy is absent at a funeral." "I'm sorry to hear that, Imogene," the teacher said. "Was it a member of your family? Why aren't you at the funeral?" "It was Leroy's friend," Imogene said. "I didn't like him." Mrs. Wendlekin was mad because the newspaper article didn't say it was Leroy Herdman's snake that caused all this trouble, and she was mad at the principal because he wouldn't say so either. "I can't prove who the snake belonged to," Mr. Crabtree said, "and even if I could, why would I? It wasn't a boa constrictor, you know, and it was dead to begin with." But I guess Miss Wendlekin was really out to nail Leroy, and she wouldn't give up. "Of course it was Leroy's snake. Everybody knows it was Leroy's snake. Why else would he bury it? Why would Leroy Herdman bury someone else's snake?" "I don't know." Mr. Crabtree was fed up with the snake and Leroy Herdman and Mrs. Wendlekin too. "But if he did bury a snake for somebody else, it was the first cooperative thing he's ever done in his life. And I just think we ought to drop the whole subject. Don't you?" And that's the end for today. I'll see you tomorrow, boys and girls. Bye.